joy to be here this morning, and I want to thank Miss Candace. Where'd she go? There she is. I want to thank Miss Candace and Miss Glenna here. I want to thank them for giving me this opportunity to come share my heart with you ladies. I never take these opportunities lightly, and I count it an honor to be here this morning. Today I'm going to be sharing some things I've never shared before. I'm going to be a little more raw with my story as I share my testimony, so y'all please pray for me because the devil's already been on my back this week. But when I found out I was going to be speaking twice, the Lord impressed it on my heart to add to my story. I'm going to be giving more background on my childhood that led into my teen years and into my adulthood. So if y'all can just bear with me and listen intently, I've got a lot I want to share, and I've been praying fervently that I'll be able to help someone that's here today. And I promise you, a lot of prayer and preparation has gone into this. And it's my heart's desire that I can be a blessing and help to some dear lady here that's here today that needs to hear my story. I'm going to ask Brianna, when she's already here, to come up, and we're going to sing a song that goes right along with our theme today. It talks about trusting and loving the Lord, and it's called With All I Am. So overwhelmed so easily. Having faith has always been hard for me, and I really don't know why. 'Cause Lord, you've done so much for me. Matthew 22:37. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. I want to start off by saying God has been
so good to me. He's been so faithful, even my most difficult days, and I promised the Lord years ago if He ever gave me the opportunity to share my story, I would be willing, and I would give Him all the glory for what He's done in my life and what He's brought me through. Some days, I'll be honest with you, I look back in amazement of what He's done, and I get so overwhelmed of the goodness of God in my life. It excites me that I get to serve such an amazing God. And I want to start off by telling the Lord that I love Him with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind. Without the Lord, I am absolutely nothing. Can I tell you that it's only by His grace that I'm standing here this morning in front of you ladies? Our family has had the privilege to come here at Hilltop and sing a few times, and y'all seen the family that seems all put together, but what you haven't seen is our backstory and everything we had to go through and how the Lord has worked in our lives to get us to this place. You see, there was a time in my early childhood days that I fervently loved the Lord with all my heart. But there also was a time later in my adult life that I had to fall back in love with Jesus. Let's pray, and then I'm going to get started in the core of my testimony. Dear Lord Jesus, God, I thank you for this day. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity. Lord, I cannot do this without your touch and without your help. Lord, I pray that you'd help me right now, calm my nerves. God, please help me to be a blessing to these ladies. Lord, help me to show them how real you are. Lord, I just pray right now, Lord, that you just speak to these ladies' hearts, please. Please help me, Lord. Help me to stay focused on the words you've already given me to say, Lord. And I thank you and praise you for what you're going to do. Lord, if there's anyone that doesn't know you, Lord, may they see how you've worked in my life and see that you're real and that they come to know you, Lord. And I thank you for this day, God, in Jesus' name. I was blessed to grow up in church practically all my life. When I was first born, my family moved from Statesville, North Carolina to Morristown, Tennessee for about the first 6 months of my life. Things didn't work out there, so my family decided to come back home to North Carolina. They couldn't find anywhere to live in Statesville, so instead, they found a place in Salisbury, North Carolina. I believe with all my heart that this wasn't coincidental, but rather God's perfect will for our lives at that time. There was a church right down the road from us, Gospel Light Baptist Church, and the Lord knew our family would need this church in a great way. Someone there stopped by our house and invited us to go there, and I don't even know who it was, but I'm so thankful for that person, because it was at this church where God used many, many people to invest in my life. It was at this church where the Lord saved me as a 12-year-old girl. It was at this church where I was grounded in my faith and learned about the Lord and was taught so many valuable lessons that I still use today. A few years later, as a 4-year-old little girl, things happened and I finally found myself in a single-parent home. I remember being so sad because I love both of my parents, but I was too young to understand all that was going on behind the scenes. But I had a godly mother who faithfully took me to church and taught me by example how to truly live for Him, how to have faith in Him, and how to get a hold of God through prayer. But every night, my mom was faithful to have family devotions with me and my 2 older brothers. And I can remember her calling out to God, weeping, begging God to save her children, and one day use her children to serve the Lord with their lives. That made such a lasting impression on me during my childhood years. I watched my mom go through so many things, but her children were her life, and she invested so much into each one of us, but always did without for herself. And one thing I didn't want to do when I grew up was to hurt her. She sacrificed so much for me and my brothers, and I didn't want her labor to be in vain. The Lord saved me when I was 12 years old, and it was then that her God became my God. Gospel Light Baptist Church became our safe haven. It was our life. Gospel Light had a Christian school there, and my mom's main desire when our home fell apart was to be able to be with her children. And God opened a door for her to be a teacher's aide at the Christian school, and God fulfilled that desire for my mom. By faith, she put all three of us in school there, not knowing how she was going to pay for it, but trusting that God would provide. Mom told me that she would go by the school office to pay on our school bill, only to find out it had already been paid. So many times that would happen. And I can remember in particular one school year going into the 4th grade, all I had to wear was 2 dresses. And I had to rotate those 2 dresses every other day. And of course I was embarrassed having to wear those same dresses every week. But by the end of 4th grade, I had so many dresses, a closet full, from people giving me their older daughter's clothing that I'd outgrown. And I saw the Lord provide those clothes for me. We were so poor. I can remember barely having food in our cupboards. We had enough to live on, but just not an overabundance. In one Christmas season, the Christian school took up a pounding. Of course, we took what little we had and gave what we could for the pounding, but little did we know it was being taken up for our family. I never saw so much food in my life. They piled our car full, and someone else came by with a truckload full, and there were times when people would buy us Christmas gifts, people would fill up our gas tank, or God would lay it on their hearts to give my mom money here and there. And we lived in a trailer park owned by a family in our church, and every December, my mom would write her normal rent check, and she would give it to our landowner there. And I watched them take it from her, rip it up, and say, "Merry Christmas." These are the kind of church people that I was so privileged to grow up around. They were real and genuine, and I'll never forget everything they did for me, and they'll never know the impact they've had in my life all throughout these years. And these are just a few examples of how God provided for us. So even as a little girl, God cared about me, and He loved me, and He sent people in my life to show me His goodness, and to show me how much He loved me and cared for me. I saw my mom have faith that God would take care of us, and He did every time. And when I was 11 years old, God brought my stepdad, Kevin Vandenberg, into my mom's life. And they just celebrated 30 years of being married. And he's been such a blessing to our family. But our whole lives evolved around Gospel Light Baptist Church and Gospel Light Christian School. And we were there literally 7 days a week. Monday through Friday was school, Saturday we worked a bus route, and Sunday, of course, was church day. There were so many wonderful people there, and we all were like family. I'm giving you ladies my background because I want y'all to know where I come from and see how God has worked in my life, even during my childhood years. And I want to mention one very special lady today. I wish she could have come today, but she had family things going on. But I want to mention her in my testimony because her life impacted me in such a powerful way. I don't even think she realizes how much of an impact she's had on my life. And of course, there's been a few other ladies, such as my mom and Miss Brinkley, my Sunday school teacher that led me to the Lord. And a few years later, Miss Cassie Caldwell, who was my pastor's wife during my teen years. But there was something different about this lady, and y'all may know her. Her name is Miss Sue Whiteheart. And I know most of y'all know who Dr. Bobby Robertson was. He was such a precious man of God, so humble. Well, Miss Sue Whiteheart is his daughter. And so what a heritage. I grew up around that. And she was my pastor's wife there at Gospel Light in Salisbury, where I grew up. But I watched her life, and it was through her godly example that God began to work in my life. And He gave me this great desire to one day have a family that would serve the Lord together. She played the piano so beautifully, her 3 children sang together, and I just loved her family. And I wanted to have what she had. I was 10 years old, and I had gotten in trouble for something. I can't even remember what it was I got in trouble for. And as a child, I was very tender-hearted, and Mom could just talk to me, and I would break down. But I remember just weeping and bawling like crazy to my mom, and I told my mom that I believed the Lord was calling me to be a preacher's wife. Now, I didn't get saved until I was 12. I had made a profession at 5 years old, but I just remember having this unusual desire to be a preacher's wife. And I was convinced at 10 years old that's what God wanted me to be. Now, I'm not sure if God calls women to be preacher's wives. But all I know is I had this strong desire to do something great for the Lord. And in my eyes, what better way to serve the Lord as a family than being a preacher's wife? While I was growing up, I remember wanting to take piano lessons so bad because I wanted to play just like Miss Whitehart. I had friends that took lessons and played, but I knew my mom just couldn't afford it. But I loved music. It was my passion, and I loved to sing. I started singing when I was 4 years old, and I learned how to harmonize at an early age. And by the time I was in second grade, me and my friends, we had a little trio with 3-part harmony, and I was the tenor singer. So as a child, music became a big part of my life. Eventually, Mom saw my heart, and I don't know how she did it, but somehow she made a way for me to take piano lessons every other week. I didn't have a piano at home to practice on, but I had a good ear and didn't even know it. My piano teacher would play the song for me, then I would sit and play it right back. Here she was thinking I was catching on quickly and reading the music, but I was just repeating what I'd heard. So I never really learned how to play by music. But I'll never forget my very first piano recital. She gave me an award as her most diligent student and said that one day she believed that I would be a church pianist. And when I heard her say that, I couldn't believe it, but it stuck with me for several years and gave me hope. I didn't get to take lessons very long, but I remember praying and asking God to please help me learn how to play. Someone had given me this old, upright, heavy, saloon-style piano. I was probably around 12 or 13 years old, but I begged God to please help me. And I'm sure my mom begged God to help her too, because it was awful. It was so out of tune, and I would bang on that thing for hours at a time. Kids, be thankful we have headphones on our piano. But we didn't have a TV when I was growing up. We didn't have video games, so I had lots of time to sit and play. And I started putting things together, didn't even know what a chord was, had no idea what I was doing, but somehow God heard my little prayer. And by the time I was 16 years old, I became the pianist at Calvary Baptist Church in Statesville, North Carolina. At this point in my life, God had moved our family there when I was 16, and they were without a pianist. And this is where I met Dr. Scott and Miss Cassie Caldwell. Does anybody know Dr. Scott Caldwell? Oh, how do we have to say anything? Precious. Love them. Well, he became my pastor, and he gave me this great opportunity to serve the Lord as a young teenager, and I'll never forget that. It meant so much to me, but I loved Preacher Caldwell and Miss Cassie. They were my mentors, during my teenage and young adult years. And I was devastated when he left Calvary to go pastor a church all the way in Georgia. I was 21 when they left. I had gotten so close to them, but as my story progresses, you'll see how God even had his hand in this situation. It sure amazes me how the Lord works behind the scenes even when we can't understand his plan. Yeah. But backing up a little, because I was 16 then, but backing up when I was 14, I went to a youth conference at Gospel Light Baptist Church in Walkertown, North Carolina. It was there that I fully surrendered my life to the Lord, and I told the Lord whatever he wanted for my life, he was in full control. My childhood desires spilled over into my teenage years, and I purposed in my heart at that youth conference to keep myself pure for the preacher God would bring into my life, even going as far as wanting to say my first kiss and holding hands on my wedding day. And sometimes we get this perfect picture of the perfect life we think we're going to have just because we give our life to the Lord. But the essence of surrender is getting out of God's way so that he can do in us what he also wants to do through us. So what we don't realize is that sometimes God's plan for our lives can turn out differently than the plan we seek out for our lives, because God sees the completed picture, but all we see are the puzzle pieces. Yes. But Romans 8:28 says this, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And sometimes you must hurt in order to know, fall in order to grow, lose in order to gain, because most of life's greatest lessons are learned through pain. Yes. Amen. But as I was saying before, I had fully surrendered my life to the Lord. My strongest desire to marry a preacher. And I felt like that was the best way for God to be able to use my life, and I would be in full-time Christian service. And that was my dream. Also, because I wanted to be a preacher's wife, I wouldn't date anyone unless they were a preacher. By the time I was 21, I dated 2 preachers, but I knew neither of them were the big one. At this point, I thought for sure I was going to be an old maid. I was lonely and disappointed because all my other friends were either engaged or in a serious relationship, and all I wanted was a godly husband and to begin my adulthood serving the Lord together with my life's mate. I began to pray more fervently and begging God to please send me someone to share my life with. And again, nothing, nobody, and no answer. Finally, I remember telling someone, I guess God doesn't have anyone for me, so I'm just going to stop looking and searching. It wasn't long after that I got a phone call from a wonderful pastor friend of mine. He called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked me if I was dating anyone. Of course, I told him no. And he began telling me about this young 21-year-old evangelist who was on fire for the Lord, preaching all over the United States, and that God was using him in a mighty way. This pastor knew my desire was to marry a preacher, and when he found out this guy wasn't dating anyone, he immediately thought of me. Go figure. So long story short, we met in July, got engaged in October, and got married the following May. And one thing, I'm glad these girls are sitting up here because I want to talk to y'all for a second. One thing I'd like to tell you young ladies that are here, before you marry someone, please make sure you get to know that person for who they truly are, because what glitters isn't always gold. Amen. Sometimes it can be fool's gold.
Yeah, that's right.
But on the outside, he was picture perfect. This guy had the perfect cover up. And because he was an evangelist at this time, he was gone a lot, traveling all over, and we never really got to truly date and get to know each other. And this is where the devil got a foothold in my life. My intentions were pure. God knew my heart. And in my thinking, God had brought this wonderful preacher into my life. And if you heard him preach, you would have thought the same. He said all the right things, preached all the right things, and I just thought he was it. This is what I've been waiting for, and the Lord had finally brought it to pass. Even down to the engagement ring. The church he went to, a lady owned a jewelry store, and she knew he didn't have no money for an engagement ring, so she asked him, she said, went up to him one day and she said, do you have $1? And he's like, sure, I have $1. She said, well, can you give me $1? And so he pulled out his wallet and gave her $1, and she turned around and gave him half a carat engagement ring, and she said, here you go, now go ask her. So even down to that, it seemed so right. It seemed like this is it. But as I said before, the devil saw this as his opportunity to ruin my life. Because you see, Satan loves to take what's beautiful and ruin it. Yeah. And that's exactly what ended up happening in my life. Now, I do want to add to you young ladies up here, I did make it to my wedding day pure. My first kiss, holding hands with my first guy was at our wedding. So I am proof to you young ladies that if you purpose in your heart and set your goals high, you can remain pure for your man. And I know that's not popular these days, but it's the truth, and it's so important for you young ladies to determine to keep yourselves pure. Yes. But when we first got married, everything was great. In fact, he ended up becoming a pastor. And when we got married, I became an instant pastor's wife. So it was like a dream come true for me. The people were absolutely wonderful, and God was so good to us there. But my childhood dream quickly turned into a nightmare. And for time's sake, I'll have to fast forward because there's so much I want to share with you ladies. But about 5 months into our marriage, I won't go into detail about it, but something happened. And immediately I began to lose some trust and respect for my husband. I didn't fully know what was going on at that time, but a couple of years into our marriage, I knew something was bad wrong. But at that time, I really didn't know how to deal with it. And because of our ministry's sake, I couldn't talk to anyone, not even my parents, about the problems we were having and what I had found out. I remember the hurt and confusion I felt, but I had to deal with this and hold this inside. It was such a burden in a way, and looking back, I realized that God was preparing me little by little of what was to come, because God knew I wouldn't have been able to handle the news all at once. So it was a gradual process that ended up taking over 4 years for me to finally get the whole truth. I was approached by a young man who had become friends with my husband. He came to me one day and said to me, "Miss Amy, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but your husband is involved heavily in homosexuality, and you don't deserve not to know what all he's been doing behind your back." I knew something hadn't been right, and I'd been praying for God to please reveal to me whatever it was that was going on. But I had no idea my home was fixing to be torn apart, never to be restored.
Staring into the darkness of the road that lies ahead, wondering where it's gonna lead. And even though the Lord lights my way, still every step is a step of faith, 'cause the only thing I can see is what's right in front of me. I don't know how it's gonna end, oh, but right now I hear him whispering, one step at a time, I'm lighting your path, and where I want you to be, my child, is exactly where you're at. Trust in me, and you'll be just fine, and let me guide your life, one step at a time. I had my plans made, but then suddenly my path changed, left a wanderer alone, or so it seemed. I thought I knew where I was going, but now I realize there's no way of knowing, 'cause the only thing I can see is what's right in front of me. I don't know how it's gonna end, oh, but right
My dreams shattered. My life that I had so carefully and meticulously planned, gone in an instant. And I was left to pick up the broken pieces and try my best to go on for God. I couldn't quit on the Lord. I don't have time to go into detail, but God had blessed me with a beautiful daughter in my first marriage. And according to the doctor, because of the underlying circumstances, there was only a 17% chance for me to be able to get pregnant with her. But I know without a doubt, God saw the future. And He had a plan 13 years later for this little girl's life. And He was going to use her life to take my bad and ugly and turn it all around for good. She became my rainbow in the midst of my storm. I'm so thankful that in the midst of our storms, God gives us a rainbow, a promise, to help us through our valleys and storms. He promises us that He will never leave us nor forsake us. God used her in so many ways to help me get through those dark and painful days. She was only 22 months old, and here I was, now a single mom. I remember sitting on my parents' couch, and Brianna was there sitting in my lap. We were by ourselves, and I remember crying out to God. Tears were rolling down my face. I didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to make it. Brianna started crying at this point. She had no idea what was going on, but she knew her mommy was hurting. And she was such a compassionate little girl. She took her little shirt, pulled it up to my face, and she began wiping away my tears with it. Of course, that made me cry even more, but it was such a special moment we both shared together. And another time, my mom and I were outside sitting in a swing. Brianna was playing nearby, and when you're going through a valley, it's like it just takes over your life, and it's all you can think about. And we were talking, we had no idea Brianna was even listening to our conversation. I remember telling my mom how I just didn't understand why God would allow this to happen. Why did my home have to be destroyed? All I ever wanted was to serve Him with my life. Then out of the blue, we heard this sweet little voice start singing. Jesus never fails. Jesus never fails. You might as well get thee behind me, Satan. You cannot prevail because Jesus never fails.
Amen.
God used my little girl that day to remind me that no matter what I was going through, He would be faithful to me and He wouldn't fail me as long as I didn't quit on Him.
When the hurt and pain is overwhelming, when everything is so confusing, and you can't see a possible way out, when you've cried all your tears, when you're haunted by your fears, and your mind is filled the fears and doubts inside, and you don't even have to try, 'cause he pushes your weakness to the side, and grace takes over. No matter what may come, his sufficient grace is more than enough, and it will carry you all the way through. Grace takes over. The weight is lifted from your shoulders. You're stronger when you're weak, 'cause no longer are you in your own strength. God calms the fears and doubts inside, and you don't even have to try, 'cause he pushes your weakness to the side, and grace takes over. Grace takes over.
You can only imagine the pain, the hurt, and the devastation I personally went through after this. It is something I will probably never totally get over, but I can tell you that God's grace has carried me through all these years, and He has helped me and restored my life in a way I never thought could be restored. Over a course of several years, I went through every emotion possible, trying to figure out why the Lord allowed this to happen to me. But through my healing process, I realized that it wasn't the Lord's fault. Man has a will, and man has a choice. And my ex-husband chose the wrong choice. And because of his gross sin and unrepentant heart, our marriage couldn't be restored. I felt like my life was over, and I was never going to be used by the Lord ever again. But sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted. I found this quote, and it said this, God speaking: I had to take you from where you thought you needed to be to a place you didn't want to see, so that you'd grow into the person I called you to be. Sometimes you have to let go of the picture of what you thought life would be like and learn to find joy in the story you are actually living. And I'm going to do an illustration. On this table, you see this face. Those of you in the back there. We're going to call this a vessel, because our lives are like a vessel that God can use. This vessel is absolutely beautiful. In fact, it's perfect. There are no cracks, there are no holes, it's not scratched, and it's not broken. This is kind of like a picture of my life at 22 years old. Everything seemed flawless and perfect. And I thought in my heart I was ready to be used of the Lord. But what I didn't understand at that time in my life was this: the valley will teach you lessons the mountaintop never could. The devil picked up my vessel and threw it on the ground to where it broke into a million pieces. And instead of my life continuing to be this beautiful vessel, my life became this second vessel, ugly and scarred and broken. But I'm so thankful that God still loved me, and He wasn't finished with me, and He had a second path in mind for my life instead.
Broken before, but not like this. I'm shattered into a to you. I have seen you restore the most broken lives before. Oh, but I'm just not sure if you'll do the same for me, Lord. But I'm gonna trust that you can. With one touch of your hand, I'll trust that you will. But I'll keep waiting until you heal my heart. Though it seems my world is falling apart, maybe, just maybe, it's falling together. This is not forever. It may take some time, but I'm willing to wait, 'cause you know what's best for my life. You know how much I can take. You allow me to be shattered like this, but what you started, you'll finish. And there's nothing you can't fix, and you can work it and through and with brokenness. You're removing the things in my life that need to go. You're replacing them with peace and patience and hope. You're molding and defining me. You're making and refining me. I know someday I will see. Though right now it's a mystery. Oh, but when you're done with me, I'll be what you want me to be. So I'm gonna trust that you can. With one touch of your hand, I'll trust that you will. But I'll keep waiting until you heal my heart. Though it seems my world is falling apart, maybe, just maybe, it's falling together. This is not forever. It may take some time, but I'm willing to wait, 'cause you know what's best for my life. You know how much I can take. You allow me to be shattered like this, but what you started, you'll finish. And there's nothing you can't fix, and you can work it and through and with brokenness. You allow me to be shattered like this, but what you started, you'll finish. And there's nothing you can't fix, and you can work it and work through and work with brokenness. Oh, brokenness.
You see, as I quoted earlier in my testimony, Satan loves to take what's beautiful and ruin it. But God loves to take what's ruined and make it beautiful. And that's exactly what the Lord began doing in my life. For the past 14 years, He took this vessel, and the Lord, the God of heaven, He began to take those broken pieces, piece by piece, putting my life back together again. And one thing I've learned, God never takes away something from your life without replacing with something better. He began to restore what I'd lost. He first sent me a wonderful, loving, caring, compassionate husband who loves me and cherishes me and treats me like a queen. And I want to share this story with y'all. It's hilarious. I was driving down the road one day, and this is before I met my husband. And Brianna, of course, she was sitting in the back seat, and she wasn't quite 4 years old yet. But out of the blue, she says, "Mommy, I want a baby sister." I kind of chuckled to myself and I said, "Honey, you can't have a baby sister because Mommy doesn't have a husband." And she said, "Well, can you get one at Walmart?" But in her little mind, if we needed something, we just went to Walmart and got it. I told her Walmart isn't the best place to get a husband. But maybe we just need to pray about it and let God bring Mommy a husband. So thankfully she agreed that we would just pray about it. So remember when I told y'all earlier about how devastated I was when Preacher Cottle and Miss Cassie left my home church to go pastor another church down in Georgia? Well, of course, I stayed in contact with them throughout the years and went down and visited some with them when I could. And at this time, I was 29 years old, and I was singing with a trio. And Preacher Cottle's church in Georgia was having a jubilee. And he invited our trio to come sing for their meeting there. And when I got to their home, Preacher Cottle asked me if I was singing to anybody. Another preacher. That's about preachers introduce me to people. Of course, I told him, "No, sir." And he said, "Well," he said, "there's a man that's been coming to our church that I want to introduce you to. He's recently been divorced, but the Lord's been really working in his life, and I think that y'all have a lot in common and will be good for each other. He's a deputy sheriff, and it just seems like a really good fellow." So that was Thursday evening. The next day, it was a Friday morning, March 26, 2010. Won't forget this date. They were having a morning service, and we pulled up into the church, and Preacher and Miss Cassie, they had been talking to me all the way to church about this man. Miss Cassie was telling me how she thought he was very good looking and such a gentleman. Well, we drove up, and Jonathan was getting out of his vehicle. And long story short, Preacher Caldwell introduced us, and we went down and sat at a table in the fellowship hall. We were there earlier, and it wasn't quite time for the church service, so we began to talk. He was asking me all kinds of questions. And we were having a great conversation until I asked him how old he was. He said, "Just a little younger than you." Finally, he told me he was 23. And I immediately shut down. Here I was, 29, with a 4-year-old, and there was no way I was going to raise another kid. Y'all know how men are. They don't grow up till they're about 30 to 35. And I was thinking, this guy is 23 and already divorced? I mean, that was, but I didn't know he had gotten married young, but he had been married to his first wife as long as I had been married to my first husband. Well, I couldn't say anything after that, but anyway, but he knew immediately I'd shut down and was done, but he had the guts to ask me if he could sit with me at lunch. And being the nice person I was, I agreed. Poor thing, I pretty much ignored him and barely talked to him. He says he saw the back of my head the whole time. But my little Brianna's the one, by the way, playing the piano and singing, well, she talked to him the whole time. So the tables were kind of set up just like this. So I was on this side, him and Brianna and him was on the other side. But we were on opposite sides of the table, and she walked all the way around those tables to get to me. And she whispered in my ear, "Mommy, he could be my daddy. Then I can have that baby sister over here." Oh, goodness, kids. So I always tell people that my my daughter fell in love with my husband before I did. But that Friday evening after church, bless his heart, he was so bummed. But he got the courage to ask me for my phone number. I was nice, and I gave him my Mary Kay business card. But anyway, I wish I had more time to share what the Lord did for us and how it began to knit our hearts together. But obviously, the Lord brought us together, and we got married that same year on July 17th, 2010. And as sad as I was when Preacher Carlo and Miss Cassie left Calvary in Statesville to go to church all the way in Georgia, who would have thought 8 years down the road, they'd introduce me to the love of my life. I couldn't understand or see it then why God had moved them, but now I can look back and see He had a greater plan in store for me. God used Dr. Scott Caudle to get my husband where he needed to be with the Lord. My husband has another testimony, but don't have time to share all that. But my husband needed someone real and genuine in his life, and for the first time, he saw real in Dr. Scott Caudle. And we love them so much and are so thankful for God bringing this special couple in both of our lives. We've been married now for 12 years, and we're still on our honeymoon. Just ask our children, they'll tell you. But he loves Brianna as his very own daughter, and he became the father she needed when she was 4 years old. He's invested in her life. God used my husband to help heal my broken heart. God knew exactly what kind of man I needed. He's a hard worker, great provider, my best friend, and I'm so blessed beyond words. And guess what? 14 months later, the Lord gave us our precious daughter, Abby Grace. And I kind of told the Lord, I said, Lord, this has to be a girl. Brianna has prayed for this baby sister. So thankfully, we had a girl. But then He blessed us with a son, Tyler. And He's allowed me the privilege to be a stay-at-home mom, raising my children, investing in their little lives. My children became my ministry at this point in my life. And as mothers, we have such a great responsibility to teach and train our children to live for the Lord. We have no idea what we may be raising up, and it's so important to point them to the Lord. They are our future. He saved Brianna and Abby and instantly put a song in their hearts. God putting back the broken pieces. 2 years ago, He saved our son Tyler. And this past May, Tyler surrendered to preach. Amen. In fact, this church was where he did up under the arbor. He got Brother, I forgot your husband's name. Rodney. I know it's on the arbor. He gave 5 minutes. So, what a blessing and joy it is to know all 3 of our children are going to heaven with us. And 3 years ago, God began a work in our family that I never could have dreamed or imagined. Back in 2019, God began working in our family's lives in a mighty and unusual way. The girls and I have been singing together, and I told my husband I'd really like us to be able to make a CD together. Of course, it costs a lot of money to make a CD, and he said, I just don't know how we're going to be able to afford it. Well, our oldest daughter, Brianna, she was 13 years old at this point, and she began coming to me, wanting me to hear songs she had written. At first, I kind of ignored her. A 13-year-old, writing songs, Okay. Well, the next thing I knew, week by week, song after song, she kept coming to me with another song God had given to her. My husband worked 60 to 70 hours each week at a factory. And I finally told him, honey, can you please listen to these songs Brianna has written? I began to listen to them, and I was like, wow. And then he began listening to her songs, and he looked at me and he said, this CD needs to happen. I don't care what the cost is, but God just impressed on my heart that we need to make this CD. He said, I know you planned all these other songs to put on the CD, but it needs to be all of Brianna's original songs. Then he shot me by saying he was going to sing with us. So we began working on singing together as a family. That in itself was exciting, but again, we had no idea what God was about to do with our little family. But we began recording in April of 2019, and finally, August the 8th, Brother Mark Moore, our recording producer, he called to let us know he was finished with our CD and we could come pick it up so we could approve it before sending it to be duplicated. So literally, at midnight, I woke Brianna up for us to go pick up our copy. It was on a Friday, and we were going to be taking a trip, and there were already 3 churches we had planned on going to sing at during our vacation. So we had to pick it up and get it approved that day so they would have time to get the CDs made before we left on our trip. But anyways, at this time, my husband worked at a factory on 2nd shift, and he would always play around with the kids before he went to work in the afternoons. But Brianna's grandparents had brought by her hoverboard that same week, and I kept telling myself I need to get that thing put up before one of the kids gets hurt on it. I knew those hoverboards were dangerous. But the next thing I know, my crazy husband is on it, riding it. I told him, you really need to get off that thing before you get hurt. Well, he did listen to me. But in the process of getting off of it, he got hurt. I mean, bad hurt. We all heard a snap, I'm getting tired of my words, a snap, crackle, pop, and him screaming out in pain. I saw his eyes started rolling back in his head, and he started passing out, and I started panicking. I'm not a very calm person when it comes to emergency situations, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was supposed to call 911. Poor thing, my husband had to calm me down while he was Finally, he got to a point where he could talk, and he told me something was bad wrong and I needed to take urgent care. And again, long story short, we found out that he had torn his rotator cuff, 100% tear, completely off his bone. Immediately, my husband was out of work. Our stable income went from $5,000 a month to $0. Since he worked at a factory and it wasn't a work-related injury, they didn't have a job for a one-handed man to do, not to mention too much of a liability to allow him to work while he was hurt. So talking about devastating, it was a very scary time in our lives, not knowing how we were going to make it. But again, little did we know at that time what God was fixing to do. But you know what? I can't explain the overwhelming peace that God gave to us that everything was going to be all right. And sometimes the only way God can show us He's in control is to put us in situations we can't control. You see, while we were recording the CD, every day in my devotions, I begged God to do something special with it, somehow, some way, that it would touch thousands of people, not just a few. I felt in my heart that God could use our daughter's songs to give hope to the hopeless, peace in the midst of people's storms, triumph through their trials, and victory through their valleys. But what I didn't know then was how God would end up using her songs to help our family in the midst of our valley. The next week when my husband came home from the orthopedic, I knew by the look on his face that it wasn't good. He had been crying, and he told me he was going to have surgery, and he would end up being out of work for 6 to 8 months. We gathered our family around in our living room, explaining to our children the seriousness of this time in our lives. My husband picked up a copy of our CD we had just picked up. He laid it in the middle of our ottoman, and we all bowed down. We got on our knees and begged God to open doors and do something with our new family music CD. Brianna's words to her song started to overflow me. Why should I doubt? He's never failed me yet, so why should I let fear come about? Why should I doubt? He knows the way. Where He leads me, I will follow. Where He takes me, I will go, having no worry about tomorrow, for I know He is in control. And God just showed up that day in our home in a special way we'll never forget. And I can't explain the peace that came over us, that God was going to take care of us. We just had to trust Him, and for the first time in our lives, we had to totally rely on the Lord and have faith that He would take care of us. At this time, we had absolutely no idea what the Lord was doing behind the scenes. It was just another valley that God had to take us through to prove to us that He could take care of us. God wanted to teach us how to live by faith. And there was a reason for this valley, and you'll understand it here shortly as it all comes together.
Overwhelmed by the fear of what lies ahead, worried about the future and what happens next.
most exciting part of my story, because it doesn't end with a sad note, as you can see. But I'm just going to jump right in here. I'll never forget the very first night our family sang together. We drove to Faith Baptist Church in Mint Hill, North Carolina. God had given me these Bible verses that morning during my devotions. Isaiah 43, 1 and 2. Fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. In verse 18, 19, and 21 says this, Remember ye not the former things, neither consider the things of old. Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. This people have I formed from myself. They shall show forth my praise. The Lord spoke to my heart that morning and told me to stop looking back at what could have been or should have been. I've got another plan for your life, and I'm going to give you a second chance to serve me. I've seen your heart's desires. I haven't forgotten you, and if you'll just trust me, I've got a bigger plan. And ladies, if you can trust a puzzle company to make sure every piece is in the box to complete the puzzle, why can't you trust God that every piece of your life is there for a reason? I can't begin to explain to you what the Lord did in our hearts at Faith Baptist Church that night. It brought so much joy to my heart serving the Lord with my family. I wanted Faith to be the very first church we sang at because 13 years prior to this day, this is where Brianna had been dedicated back to the Lord as a little 4-month-old baby. I wanted to go back there and show the devil that he didn't win.
Amen.
He thought he could destroy us, but greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. And here was my little rainbow that God had given to me during my storm. And look what the Lord did for us. And this was just the beginning. God began opening door after door. God miraculously began meeting our needs. The entire time my husband was out of work, we never did without. And every bill, every month, was paid, always on time. I wish I had the time to tell you what all the Lord did for our family and how he took care of us. I still sit back and can't believe all that the Lord has done. And about 2 years ago, God done something else amazing for our family. While my husband couldn't work, every morning we would have our devotions together. It was a very special time for us, and some days we would be in my office together for hours. Well, one day, my husband told me that he really believed that God was going to pick us up, plant us in another church, and there was going to be a full-time ministry for us to do. And it was going to be more than just music. I told him he was crazy. I said, we've both been divorced. What could we possibly do full-time for the Lord with our past? He said, I'm just telling you that the Lord has spoken to my heart. I don't know what it could be either, but I know the Lord has shown me that he has something for our family to do. I told him, okay, I guess time will tell. Around the same time my husband had said that to me, we were invited to sing at West Park Baptist Church in Rockwell, North Carolina. I'll never forget it because God did so much for us that day. It was in October of 2019. When we drove on this church property, we knew something special was here. The service that night was unreal, and God met with us in a powerful way. Our hearts were instantly knit with these people. We formed a special friendship with the pastor and his family. God began working in our hearts about this place. It seemed out of the question because it was an hour drive just to get there. Then COVID hit, and everything that God had done with opening doors came to an absolute halt. Several places we were supposed to go and sing also got canceled. Thankfully, at this time, my husband was able to go back to work, but he didn't go back to the factory. God had enabled him to start his own business with construction and remodeling, and with this schedule, we could continue to sing and be available for the Lord. And then back in October of 2020, our family went to a revival meeting to sing in Union Grove, North Carolina.
It had been almost a complete year since we had been to West Park Baptist Church, but we couldn't get this church out of our hearts. We walked into that revival service that night, and my husband looked at me and said, "It's time." The crazy thing was, when he made that statement, I knew exactly what he was talking about. At that same moment, God gave us both complete peace about leaving our home church to go to West Park Baptist Church. I had been the church pianist there at Calvary and Stakes for almost 23 years. And it wasn't easy for me to leave because these were the people who rallied around me during the hardest time of my life, and I loved them dearly. But we knew without a doubt God was moving our hearts to this new church. And during all these transitions and God working in our family, God had also brought another pianist there at our home church who would fill in for me when our family was out singing somewhere else. I knew in my heart that our family was sent there for her to take my place as pianist. But I was holding on to that position for dear life because I thought that was all the Lord had left for me to do in service for Him. But finally, God slowly but surely changed my heart to let that church pianist position go because I realized He had another plan for our family. And I learned a great lesson. When you allow the Lord to lead and guide your life, no matter if you understand it or not, when you take that first step of faith, God starts blessing your life.
Yeah.
We watched God do some amazing things for our family. First, my ex-husband agreed to give over his parental rights to allow my husband to adopt Brianna. This is something that we have been praying about for 10 years, and we are so excited that she is officially a Brown now. And this brings me to our recent days of what the Lord is doing. 3 weeks after we joined West Park Baptist Church, an evangelist that is a member there came to my husband and asked if he would meet with him at his home the next day. Evangelist Craig Ryan told him he had something special for our family to do in ministry, and he felt like it could be intertwined with our music ministry that God had already begun for us. Talk about exciting. We could barely sleep that night and couldn't wait to hear what he had in mind for us to do. And in January of 2020, Brother Brian started a brand new missions outreach called the Ron Middleton Missions Outreach. I don't have time to go into detail about his burden, but the Lord had blessed this missions outreach so abundantly, and he began praying for God to point out a family that could help him with this new ministry. And he told my husband, "Lo and behold, your family shows up and joins our church." He said, "God knows my heart, and I began to pray about your family." So my husband met with him that next day. Brother Brian shared with my husband his burden and asked us to pray about becoming the field representatives for the Ron Middleton Missions Outreach. My husband literally wept when Brother Brian asked us to be a part of the outreach. So long story short, we have been field representatives now for the Ron Middleton Missions Outreach since January of 2021. And what we do is God opens the doors, we go into churches, share the burden, and help raise support for our MMO. The outreach is doing so much to spread the gospel. So many souls are being saved, and just since it began back in January of 2020, we started 102 churches all over the world, 17 churches here in America, and we're just so excited to have a small part in it. And remember the conversation about God picking us up, planting us in another church, and there was going to be a full-time ministry for us to do? Brother Brian told my husband that day he met with him that his goal eventually is for our family to be in this ministry full-time. Well, as of January this year, we are now full-time with the outreach ministry, completely living by faith. And remember the valley our family had to go through when my husband had his accident, how he was out of work, and we had to trust in the Lord for everything? I believe with all my heart, God allowed my husband to get hurt for a twofold purpose. First of all, it was how the Lord started us with the music ministry. And secondly, I believe God was teaching us and showing us that He could take care of us because He knew the future and He knew we needed to learn how to live by faith. So it made it somewhat easier to step out in faith this year because we knew the Lord had taken care of us then, and we knew He could do it now. And what a journey this year has been. Hebrews 11:6 became a reality to me this year. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him, for he that comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. I can tell you so many stories of how the Lord has taken care of us this year and how He's always right on time. And we're fixing to be starting a tent ministry, helping with our church plants here in America. And my husband also gets to help with construction and remodeling of these new church plants. What a blessing, and it's so exciting to serve the Lord with my family. God somehow has brought my life back around full circle. Only time will tell what the Lord has in store for our family. All it takes is a willingness to serve Him and staying faithful when the going gets tough and not quitting on the Lord. I believe if He sees your true desires to serve Him with your life, He will make it happen no matter your failures. And at times, it seems as if your world is falling apart, but if you're God's child, it's just falling together. He's in control. Even in your dark valleys, God is in control. The storm that was sent to break you is going to be the storm that God uses to make you. And when nothing makes sense, He is still God, and He is still in control.
Nothing around you makes sense as you kneel down to pray. Lord, why would you allow this? Is all you can say. Thoughts of fear and doubt rush in. It's worse than before. Will I see the sun again? And can I do this anymore? Then you hear the Lord say, child, there will be a brighter day. I know your pain, I know your sorrow, I know the tears that flow through the night when it seems there's no tomorrow. I know you don't know what this child is for, but child, I do, and I see past the storm. I know right now you think this pain will never end. I know you feel as though the sun will never shine again. But I see what you can't imagine. I know what my plan holds. A perfect design that you can't fathom. Watch as it unfolds. I know your pain, I know your sorrow, I know the tears that flow through the night when it seems there's no tomorrow. I know you don't know what this child is for, but child, I do. This child, I do, and I see past the storm. I see past the
I'm so thankful that we
we serve a God who sees past our storms. He is faithful, and we can rest in Him and know that all things work together for our good. And God can take what's broken, and He'll begin working in our lives, putting us back together piece by piece, scuffing off the bad edges, filling in the cracks, continuing to mold us into His likeness. And I want to finish my illustration right here. Brianna's going to help me, okay? Okay, think about this. Brianna's holding this water. This water represents the Holy Spirit, okay? A whole vessel, this is the whole vessel. I know you ladies can't see back there, just use your imagination. A whole vessel must be filled. See how long it takes to fill it up? And running over before it can start giving out. But if you notice, hold on just a second, this broken vessel, you see the cracks, the holes, and the scratches? Can you show it to them? Because the ones in the back can't see it, okay? And you see the brokenness of this vessel, and you have to agree it's ugly. But after it's all been put back together, when you begin to pour water in this broken vessel, it doesn't hold the water for itself, but as you see, as fast as the water is poured inside, it quickly disperses and gives out to what's around it. And that's how God can use a broken vessel. And all you can do is God keeps pouring you in, filling you up. You just keep dispersing it out to those around you. Because you'll be so overwhelmed of His blessings in your life, and you can't help but share what all the Lord has done and what He's brought you through. Because guess what? You can't take any of the credit because it's all Him and what He's done in your life. You see, ladies, it's your brokenness that God will use, not your flawlessness. And after you've suffered a while, when you remain faithful to the Lord, I promise you, when you least expect it, He'll start filling you with His grace, His mercy, His goodness, until all of a sudden, His blessings are running over until you can't hold it inside for yourself anymore. And that's when God can really use your life, when you get completely broken and empty of yourself, so God Himself can fill you as you become more like Him, where He alone can get the praise and honor and glory that He so deserves. 1 Peter 5:10-11 says, "But the God of all grace, who hath called us into His eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after that ye have suffered a while, make you perfect, establish, strengthen, settle you. To Him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen." At 22 years old, I was just like this vessel, flawless and perfect, nowhere near where I needed to be for God to be able to use my life. So God allowed me to be like this second vessel, broken and battered, fit for the Master's use. Fire seems to be more than you can take. You wonder if somehow God has made a mistake. Well, let me tell you, I've been there before, but now I see what that trial was for. You're not gonna see it
will establish you, strengthen you, settle you and make you perfect. And in the end, it'll be worth it. He will establish you, strengthen you, settle you and make you perfect. And in the end, oh, in the end, it'll be worth it.
Sometimes God takes you on a journey that you didn't know you needed to bring you everything you ever wanted. Trust His plan. If God can remove something you never dreamed of losing, trust that He can replace it with something you never dreamed of having. Don't be afraid of starting over again. This time, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. Our theme here today is falling back in love with Jesus. And I want to tie everything together with this theme. So I shared with y'all in the beginning of my testimony how I loved the Lord with all of my heart in my early years and how I wanted to serve Him with my life. But there was a time that I had to fall back in love with Jesus. First of all, I want to say divorce is never pretty. Those of you who have been through it know exactly what I'm talking about. It causes a lot of heartaches, a lot of stress, a lot of emotions, and it just does something to your spirit. After divorce, it's almost like you're never the same again. Totally changes you. I don't recommend divorce to anyone. If you can restore your marriage, then by all means, restore, because it's not worth the heartaches. But I had a very unusual situation. In fact, when everything came out in the open about my ex-husband, my intentions was not to go and divorce him. At that time, that thought didn't even cross my mind. I was just thankful God had got it all out in the open, because I was tired of the facade and the hidden sin. It was almost like I'd been holding my breath for so long, and all of a sudden, I could breathe again. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, but thankfully, my pastor at the time, Dr. Chris Hazlett, many of y'all know him. He pastors at Calvary in Statesville, but he had enough discernment to tell me, if I went right back to him, that he wouldn't have anything to do with me and Brianna, and I would be on my own. He kind of jerked me into the reality, really. He said what he's involved in is very serious. It's an abomination to the Lord. God hates it. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah over it, and the last thing I needed to do was put myself and my daughter right back into this situation, because God would never bless it. My pastor told me what I needed to do was to give him 6 months to a year. He needed to be willing to get proper counseling, give him time to get his life right with the Lord. Then, if he sincerely gets right with the Lord, then at that point, we could seek counsel for ourselves and try to work things out. But unfortunately, it went quite the opposite. I'd gone back and gotten a job at the bank I'd previously worked at to help provide for Brianna. And one morning while I was working, in walked a deputy sheriff serving me divorce and child custody papers. Then the long battle began. It was a mess, but in the end, I got full custody of Brianna. And it was a miracle, because instead of him getting her the usual Friday through Sunday, every other weekend visitation, it was court-ordered for him to get her Thursday through Saturday, every other weekend, so she wouldn't miss church on Sundays. So that was a blessing, to be able to keep her in church all those years. Only by God's grace and strength, I stayed strong and steady those first couple of years. And I was determined I wasn't going to quit on the Lord, because now I had a little girl that depended on me. And she was my driving force to keep me focused on the Lord. Then about a month before I met my husband, I started having panic attacks and anxiety. I remember my dad telling me, when all the anxiety started happening, he said, "You just need a man in your life." I'd always told people I'd never marry again after what all I went through, but for the first time since my divorce, I told my dad, "I think you're right. I do need a man in my life." So I met my husband shortly after that, and the anxiety subsided for a while because I was in love. And I had a real man in my life. But then sometime after I had Abby and Tyler, the anxiety came back full force, and I was told due to post-traumatic stress. from what I've been through, it finally caught up with me. But I had a wonderful, loving, and patient husband who helped me through that rough time in my life. My mom was also a big help to me. I would call her 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, couldn't sleep, anxiety. Some of you might know what that's all about. It's not a fun thing to go through. But she would help me through those bad nights. But somewhere in the middle of this downtime in my life, when I was supposed to be the happiest because God had begun to restore what I'd lost, the devil began to jump on my back and whispering in my ear. He knows when you're at a weak point in your life, and that's when the enemy attacks. But I began to have some bitterness and anger in my heart towards the Lord. Preachers would come in and preach to the young people and would say things like, keep yourself pure, it's worth it. Save yourself for your mate and you'll never regret it. Serve the Lord and surrender your life to the Lord and you'll be blessed. And young people would go down to the altar and I would be so jealous because my life had gotten messed up. Not from what I had done, but because of someone else's sin that affected my life. And the devil had me convinced, because of my divorce, I'd never be able to serve the Lord with my life. And here they had their whole life ahead of them, a clean slate. And I would just get so upset. I would say to the Lord, Lord, I kept myself pure, but look what happened to me. It wasn't worth it for me. I surrendered my life, but everything got taken away and it wasn't worth it for me. I was angry at my ex-husband for crushing my dream and ruining my life. And as I mentioned before, I went through every emotion possible during that time. I was going to church, but I wasn't being asked to sing or play the piano. I had been involved with a couple of singing groups, but for some reason, even that had fizzled out. So for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing nothing for the Lord, and I was miserable. But my heart wasn't right, and I believe the Lord set me down for a while. He knew before he could use me again, I needed complete healing, and I needed time for that healing. He used my husband to get me back to where I needed to be with the Lord. So thankful for a wonderful husband. God knew the special kind of man that I would need. I was so hurt and the pain was so deep, and it was like I couldn't snap out of it. And truth be told, I was wallowing in self-pity. My husband, he's such a kind and compassionate man, but he's also bold and firm when he needs to be. And I'll never forget the night my husband set me down and had a heart-to-heart talk with me. Oh, he was gentle with me and he used his words very wisely, but he was honest with me. He asked me, honey, when are you going to just let this go? You can't do a thing about what happened. You can't change it. You can't stay mad at the Lord because it wasn't the Lord's fault. We talked some, and I told him my heart was just so grieved because I could never be in ministry ever again. It was all taken away, and I began to share with him my feelings that I would have inside when preachers would preach about giving your life to the Lord in full-time ministry and how low the devil would make me feel about it. He looked at me and said, honey, you do have a full-time ministry. Look around you. God's given you 3 beautiful children. They are your ministry. Your family is your ministry. Quit worrying about everything else and just focus on our children in our home. Teach them, train them, love them. That's your ministry. And this is where God has you right now, and this is what's most important. Then he gently asked me this question that changed my life. He said, honey, when are you going to forgive him? And when he said those words to me, I literally began to weep uncontrollably. He said, I don't know why you're harboring so much bitterness and anger towards him because he has nothing. And God's given you a family and a home, a husband that loves you and adores you, and a good life now. He said, I pity him and I feel sorry for him because he's alone. And he has to live with what he's done for the rest of his life. He said, the devil has you bitter, and you can't do anything for the Lord when you're bitter. It's only hurting you. That night was my turning point. And that night, I poured my heart out before the Lord, and I asked the Lord to forgive me for my bitterness and anger. I even took it a step further, The next time I saw my ex-husband, I apologized to him for all the bitterness I had towards him. And when I did that, it was like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't long after that, my pastor asked me if I would be willing to become the church pianist again there at Calvary in Statesville. Rihanna and I started singing together, and God started using me again. And I want to quickly share 3 things that helped me fall back in love with Jesus, because truth be told, I'd lost my sincere love for the Lord because of everything that happened. But number 1, God's graciousness made me fall back in love with Him. Psalm 77, 1 through 11, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and He gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord, my soul ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song of the night. I communed with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? And will He be favorable no more? Is His mercy clean gone forever? Doth His promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath He in anger shut up His tender mercies? Selah. And I said, this is my infirmity. But I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. In Psalm 145, 8 and 9, answers that question. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? It says this, the Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and of great mercy. The Lord is good to all, and His tender mercies are over all His works. In verse 18 and 19, the Lord is nigh unto all them that call upon Him, to all that call upon Him in truth. He will fulfill the desire of them that fear Him. He also will hear their cry and will save them. In Lamentations 3, 21 through 23, this I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. God is full of compassion and kindness. He knows we are, but does. He's patient with us, long-suffering. And I'm so thankful that God didn't turn me away during that low point in my life. His graciousness helped me fall back in love with Him. And secondly, God's grace made me fall back in love with Him. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. And He said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. And then 2 Corinthians 4, 8, 9, and 15. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Verse 15. For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound to the glory of God. I stand up here and I think about what all God has done in my life, and how He's gracefully put my life back together in such an unusual way. I believe God has a perfect will for our lives, but then He also has a permissive will for our lives. And let me be clear on this. I'm not saying that divorce was God's will for my life. God's perfect will was for my home to stay together. But God does give man a choice, and sin does have its consequences, and that sin destroyed my first marriage. But I do believe that God had a permissive will for my life. He allowed it. God knew what was going to happen, because remember, He sees the completed puzzle where we only see the puzzle pieces. And when I read this verse, for all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound to the glory of God. I looked up that word redound, and it means to abound. And you remember, it was my heart's desire to be used of God. Did I have to first be broken and empty of myself for Him to really use me? Could it be that now God is using my life as a testimony to show His abundant grace and to point others to Christ? Because when I share my story, only God can get the glory. Had I not gone through that storm, I wouldn't be up here sharing the grace of God in my life. And when I share my story, maybe I can influence others to not give up on the Lord when trials come. God was faithful to me all those years, and His grace is what carried me through. And seeing God's grace in my life has made me fall back in love with Him. And number 3, lastly, God's goodness made me fall back in love with Him. Psalm 27:13-14. I had fainted unless I had believed to see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. I don't even have to expound on this point. No doubt, you ladies can see God's goodness in my life. I'm so undeserving of all the Lord has done for me. What a journey it's been. Serving the Lord gets sweeter and sweeter. Watching God continue to work in our lives, realizing He's not finished with us yet. I believe the best is yet to come. But seeing God's graciousness, God's grace, and God's goodness in my life has made me fall back in love with Him. Can I tell you that I love Him more today than I ever have before? Then let me encourage you, if you're going through your valley right now, don't turn to the world because the world doesn't have the answer. Don't quit on the Lord because He is the answer. Years ago, I had a choice to make. Was I going to just walk out on the Lord, or was I going to stay close to the Lord? The devil used the sin of my ex-husband to try to make me just give up on the Lord. And under the circumstances, I had every reason to quit, throw in the towel, and be done. Just the embarrassment alone was enough to make me walk away from it all. But I'm so thankful I didn't walk away. Look at what blessings I would have missed out on if I would have quit. Instead, I began to cling to the Lord. He was my only hope for restoration and healing. And at this time in my life, Jesus became my everything. And I knew as long as I had the Lord, He would get me through. And I know without a doubt, God can do the same for you. Just trust Him because He knows the way. And one day you'll look back and see that He was faithful through it all. And while I was going through this valley, I had a dear friend who said to me, God's going to get you through this. And one day, I believe with all my heart, you're going to stand in front of some ladies who are going to need to hear your story so they don't give up on the Lord. I wonder as I stand here this morning if my story might be for one of you ladies that's sitting out here today. You may be ready to quit because of your circumstances, because of your valley, because of your brokenness. I have no idea what you may be going through, but God does. You can't give it to the devil and give up on the Lord. You must keep on keeping on for the Lord. God can turn what's broken and empty and make it blessed and overflowing if you just fall in love with Him. I promise He will never leave you nor forsake you. And I want to close by saying this. That ugly part of your story that you may be going through right now, one day is going to be one of the most powerful parts of your testimony. We're going to close with a song, Brian, if you don't mind bringing that one. Back in 2020, the Lord opened the door for the first time for me to share my story. Brianna came up to me and she said, Mommy, let me get to the song because I don't know. I'll be ready for it. She said, Mom, she said, I wrote a song for your testimony. She said, and I want you to sing it at the meeting where I was going to speak. So she said, I want you to learn it and sing it. And I listened to her sing this song and I just wept. And it's called This Broken Vessel. And I love this song, and it's just blessed my heart when she wrote this song for me. But I hope it'll help you and it'll be a blessing to you. My world had crumbled, my life was shattered, and all the broken pieces were laying at His feet. I thought it was over then, and I couldn't comprehend why this would happen.
chose to